Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to the people. Today, we have on another congressional candidate. We have Jen Perelman from the 23rd District of Florida. Jen, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm really glad to be able to talk with you today, Jen. Before we get into the heart of what your campaign is and what you're trying to champion, I'd love to have my audience be able to get to know you a little bit better, understand what you were doing before you decided to run for office, and why you decided that this was the race you wanted to run in this cycle.
Sure. Well, I am a second generation native to South Florida. I was actually born in North Miami Beach, so I'm from here, which is not very common for people my generation to actually be from here. Yeah. So it's just where I'm from. So, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz has been my congressperson for the past 16 years. And we'll get into that later. But so I grew up in North Miami Beach in a very working class Jewish neighborhood, working class Jewish family. I'm the first person in my family that went to college. And, I left for 15 years. I studied journalism, marketing, and ultimately went to law school. And I ended up doing criminal defense, which wasn't my original plan, but I really enjoyed it a lot. And it's one of the many reasons why criminal justice reform is a huge part of what I want to do and a big part of my platform. So my background is in journalism and law, and I've done a lot of different pro bono work. Mostly I do see it as much more rewarding. But really what we're doing here is we're trying to say that representation is supposed to be a term of service and not a career. And that's what this campaign is about. It's about service. So we've been running a very community service focused campaign for the past, 10 months, but long before the coronavirus outbreak. And to me, it's just, we're showing this district what your representative is supposed to look like. And that's just been our what we've been doing. We did a community garden, we do cleanups at the beach, we do veterans nursing home, food distributions, mobile school pantry, all different things. And we go and we say, how can we help you? And that's really what we've been trying to do. And as far as Debbie and challenging her, she takes so much corporate money, and as somebody who's been a constituent of hers for 16 years in Congress, but before that she was our Florida legislator. So and just knowing who she takes her money from, and I want to get the corporate money out, and I want this to be something that regular people should be able to do.
Yeah, so you said beforehand that it was atypical for someone like yourself to be living in the area that you do. Could you describe a little bit more about the 23rd District, what types of characteristics it embodies, and then, what types of specific issues it's facing today?
Okay. By the way, I'm not atypical for living here now. It's just not typical for people to be from here. We have most people in South Florida are generally not from here, and especially not people whose parents are from here. Like, that's highly unusual. Our district demographic is it's diverse, but yet it's very safely gerrymandered blue. Okay. And I would say that, we do tend to have our super voter population, which are going to be a lot of older, upper middle class, more academic, and often Jewish in this district in terms of who your real super voters are. But we have a very large amount of people that are Latino in this district. We have a large Black population in this district that does not get any attention from our current representation. And so there's people that have not previously been engaged that I have been working hard for the past year to engage.
Okay. And, so you've described kind of like the demographics of the area. What are some of the issues that population is really facing, and how have you been trying to appeal to those groups with your own agenda?
I look at our district and it is very diverse, right? So on one hand, we have an area called Weston, and that's very, upper socioeconomic, very suburban, lots of subdivisions, everything you would expect, golf courses. And then we have parts of our district, like a place called Liberia, which is one of the oldest historically Black communities in Broward County. And it's, obviously it's lower socioeconomically. And so those are the issues that I'm infinitely more concerned with, are the people whose issues need to be met first. So it isn't that the people in Weston don't have issues, they do, but I'm just more concerned with satisfying basic needs first. And I would say that, The biggest issue really right now is economic. Our income inequality, wealth inequality in Florida is really high. I mean, we're definitely up there. We have a serious crisis of affordable housing. We have McDonald's workers in Fort Lauderdale that make $8.25 an hour. And live in South Florida. So there's a lot of major economic issues that are very prevalent down here in our, less fortunate, vulnerable communities. And then we have a climate crisis that's upon us. We're below sea level, essentially. And we don't have a single person in Congress down here that's really taking the initiative to do anything about it. So that's something is important. In fact, my congresswoman gives subsidies to the sugar industry, which is one of the biggest agricultural polluters in the state of Florida. So it's just, there are things that can be done. I mean, there's some things that maybe it is too late, but we need to at least be trying to do what we can do.
Yeah, I think that certainly makes sense. So, I hear the issues that you're trying to champion. You've mentioned before the criminal justice, you've mentioned income inequality, and you've mentioned climate change. What would you describe as your top 3 to 5 solutions, either to handle that or things that go beyond that? Because, those things are very large categories. What are some of the champion policies that you have on your platform?
Our top 3 are Medicare for All, Green New Deal, and criminal justice reform. Now, Medicare for All is pretty self-explanatory. I support a single payer program, no private insurance. Healthcare should not be a for-profit industry, period. And it will not work for everyone until the profit motive is taken out. So that one's pretty specific. The Green New Deal is obviously very broad and massive, and it includes a lot of different things. But the general premise of it is environmental, social, and economic justice. And to basically come together and find a way to help all those things simultaneously. So a jobs program that's working on renewable energy. And, there is a lot of ways for those things to come together, which is why I think it is broad. You can't just, make one little thing. It really is very all encompassing. But I would say climate crisis is definitely our second. And my third is criminal justice reform. And the 2 big components of that for me are we need to abolish the profit motive in the corrections industry, because that is another area that should never be for profit. I think that in and of itself will solve a lot of the problems. When there isn't a financial incentive to incarcerate people, you might not have an over-incarceration problem. I believe in decriminalizing marijuana. I believe in releasing, commuting, and expunging the records of everybody who is incarcerated or has been incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses. I think that drugs are a healthcare issue, not a criminal issue. I mean, there's just a fundamental paradigm shift that needs to happen, because essentially since the Civil War, we've been going out of our way to overly criminalize behaviors in order to target certain sets of the population. And that is something with which I am very aware. And that is where we get into police reform and demilitarization of polices and all that. But to me, it's pretty comprehensive. Criminal justice reform is a huge thing for me.
Okay, so I wanted to drill into those just a little bit. I think you made it clear Medicare for All is a very clear thing, but I wanted to focus on the Green New Deal part because, as you know, the Green New Deal is a resolution. And so it would say we have this obligation to be handling a lot of these issues, but it's not specific legislation that would actually implement law. So let's say we pass a Green New Deal, what are some aspects of a climate crisis solution that you would want to make sure that we're pushing forward to be able to handle the gravity of that type of a situation?
I think that the key thing is, like I said, it's this paradigm shift. Like right now, and this is for do you have kids? Do you have kids? You look very.
I don't know. I'm a kid myself.
Yeah. Okay, so the premise is you reward good behavior and you don't reward the bad behavior. Okay, this is not rocket science. It isn't. So when you're talking about things like environment and how companies are treating the environment, why are we subsidizing the companies that are doing the polluting instead of overtaxing them? And why are we not subsidizing the companies that are bringing in cleaner, renewable energy? Why are we not subsidizing that innovation? And I'm not saying that renewables doesn't have its own set of issues, because it does, but we are definitely incentivizing the bad behavior on the part of industry and corporate America. And, I'm not going to just say it's all this, but quite honestly, the military industrial complex is the number one source of what is happening to our environment and pollution. So to not address that as part of it just seems It all goes together. And the key thing that we have to realize is, what do we want to do? What are we seeking to accomplish? And how do we get that behavior? Just like you would with your children. How do you get them? You want to tend to use carrots and not sticks. So why are we not subsidizing and incentivizing what we want? And we know why. We know that it's because the military industrial complex and the fossil fuel industry and big pharma and all these industries have completely bought our Congress. And as long as that's what we're doing, we are not thinking about policy and the benefit of the collective. We're not even thinking about that. And this is what I say, like, we could debate little bits and pieces of policy, but we're not going to get anything done until we at least agree that some of these things have to have the profit motive taken out, and these people can no longer be for sale in our Congress. So until that happens, everything else is just a moot conversation.
Yeah, I do strongly agree with your point on democracy reform, and the way we finance and how we have people representing us is the big thing, because we're not going to get any progress. But just a further point on the climate portion, I wanted to hear, do you support like just a solar and wind vision? What do you think are the energy sources that your district could potentially be championing in such a Green New Deal?
I am so completely open to learning as much as I can about this. And what's interesting is tonight I do a regular Monday night live stream. And tonight I have a special guest who is an expert on nuclear energy and really knows a lot about some of the problems with renewables, because they are not without their own problems as well. So it isn't as simple of a fix as we can all just keep doing exactly what we're doing and just switch over to solar. Or switch over to wind, or switch. It's way more complicated than that. But what I do know is there are certain industries we should not be continuing to pursue, right? So I don't necessarily know the best answer. I know that we should be investing money there and not in drilling for oil, because somewhere out there are people that truly understand this. Now, interestingly, I saw this really cool article that showed this floating barge-looking thing floating in the ocean. It was huge. And it was solar panels, and it had wind and water, and it had the water turbines. So it was almost like a triple floating power pack. And so I know that there are people that are really working on this. Those are the people we need to be subsidizing, not the fossil fuel industry. And when we do that, we can find solutions, or at least the best of what we can do given where we are right now. But I assure you, drilling for more oil and dredging along our shores and building marinas for yachts and pulling out the natural flora is not the direction we need to be going in.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Frankly, I'm happy to hear that you're listening to some of the nuclear scientists, because I do think that's a very valuable transitionary fuel. And I also like the admission that, frankly, not everyone in Congress is going to be a climate expert. They need to be talking to those people and just understanding the basic fact that fossil fuels is not our future. So the last question I wanted to clarify on a policy level for now is, on criminal justice reform, one of the big things that I had been hearing in the news as of the last cycle in 2018 was the idea of, giving back voter rights to ex-felons. Do you believe that voter rights should be stripped from felons in the first place when they're in jail? Or do you think that they should be just restored, once they come out of jail? Or should they lose that entirely? What do you think is the right path forward for them?
This is something that I can break down two ways. One would be my personal opinion, right? So my personal opinion is that your right to vote is completely independent of any crime you ever commit in this country. That's just my personal. I think that I don't care if you're incarcerated. I don't care. That is not, I don't see I see about as much logic there as the connection of employment and healthcare. Like those are just completely unrelated things. That being said, I was involved with the Amendment 4, which was our state of Florida constitutional amendment that reinstated felons' voting rights. And we now just had another victory as the state sought to impose regulations on an amendment that we passed to actually make it harder for them to vote yet again. And a federal court just ruled that unconstitutional. So I am very much against the idea of, the key thing we were able to accomplish in Florida is we had a lifetime ban. And that was ultimately what they were trying to undo. Florida was one of a handful of states that had a lifetime ban on someone with a convicted felony of being able to vote. And so Amendment 4 at a minimum got rid of that, which is that's a really good thing. But no, I don't think somebody's criminal. To me, they're unrelated. However, that being said, in terms of what kind of policy or legislation I would support, that would be really heavily dependent on the majority of like constituents and what people were really wanting, because I really do see this as a representative job, not a leader job. But I think it's also important to educate people. So like, I am not a fan of the idea, but a lot of people, they support it.
Yeah, I totally see that. It's kind of what can you achieve, especially since a lot of this would be state-run legislation. It wouldn't be necessarily
Exactly.
a federal level. So yeah, I could see that challenge occurring.
That's why I don't really say, because it's just my opinion. Like, I don't think they should be related.
Yeah, that's understandable. So, I wanted to get back to a point you made beforehand about how, frankly, it's the democracy reform that's needed to make any of this stuff happen. I wanted to understand your tactics. Let's say you're able to beat Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you're elected to Congress. What do you think is your strategy for starting to accomplish some of your agenda, both as an inside game of working with the people in Congress, as well as an outside game with your community?
To me, this, as I said from the beginning, first and foremost, is about community service. That's what it is. Now, I happen to live here, so I consider it serving this community, but I do sort of see the collective aspect of what's going on in this country and feel a certain amount of responsibility for that as well. So, my strategy is to be someone who is unbought and unbossed. I hate to quote Shirley Chisholm because I feel not worthy, but what I can do is just say to everybody that's in my district that I will fight for you and be as transparent as everything that is in front of me. And I get that we always sit back in judgment of how people vote in Congress, and we should, because they're our employees and they're very insubordinate, and we should be that way. But there are a lot of things that go on that we don't know and that we're not privy to, and different agreements and different negotiations. And so I always say, I'm never going to promise that things like that don't happen, but I can promise to be transparent about it. And I can promise to do the best I can to put forward what we want to accomplish as, moving forward. But that's not going to be easy. How few of me are there? Yeah. And how many people are willing to not be liked and not be popular. And then when you do that, how impotent do you become? And these are things that I think about, because someone like me is not the person who would get the choice things. Someone like me, and that's just how it works until there's enough of a switch and enough of a balance change. And that's just the way it is. So, how effective, I don't know. I just know how genuine and accountable. And that's really, that's kind of what I said. That's all I can do at this point.
Yeah, I do like that, in that you're not over-promising. Like, frankly, it does need a sea change, as you're kind of describing, to get this backbone of support. Like, I know the Progressive Caucus seems like one of the largest in Congress, but not all of them are just solely Progressive Caucus members. We have a lot of New Deal Democrats, and then you have all the Republicans too. On that note, I wanted to understand what your leadership style is, in terms of what do you think like the Progressive Caucus needs to be doing as a group to be able to bolster this progressive movement that you are part of?
It's one of those where I want to preface this with, I'm not judging anybody who's there, because I really don't know the ins and outs, and I don't want to sound like just completely ignorant. But first of all, as far as the people that are on that Progressive Caucus list, it's my understanding that at least half of them are not really progressives, or at least not what people that consider themselves progressive but also consider progressive, right? So I think that it needs to the Progressive Caucus should actually be of progressive individuals. And I think you need to clean that out. And arguably it would be even smaller than it is. So that I see that's kind of going in the backwards direction. But I think when you do that and you have it be people that are truly progressive, you can actually sit down and come up with, these are our priorities, these are our goals, this is what we're going to fight for, and we are going to stand firm in a block of people until we get single payer healthcare. We're not going to keep allowing there to be bailouts of corporations when all people got was a $1,200 a month for 1 month stimulus check. You're not going to win. Okay. That's not the point. It's sort of like, and I always say this, Chris Hedges says, you don't fight fascists because you think you can win. You fight fascists because they're fascists. And that progressive bloc isn't big enough now. It isn't, but that doesn't mean that you don't make it difficult. You do what you do. Nobody's ever going to negotiate with you if they know that they don't have to. And I just think you have to use the numbers you have and keep building those numbers. I think they should be helping down ballot progressives, sitting back, and all of a sudden now they're not wanting to challenge incumbents. And, to me, my goal would be to get as many more people that are not on the payroll in to actually be able to do what we're trying to do. So I think, to me, it's two fronts. It's really organizing who is truly progressive and deciding what it is you really stand for. And it's trying to help more of you get in there. I mean, that's what, to me, makes common sense.
Yeah, I think that does make sense in terms of solidifying what the message is. I think there is a lot of message clarity that's not coming to fruition because simply they've been willing to cave on some of these pressures from inside Congress, especially relevant in this whole coronavirus era. I'm curious, after you've defined the message and you clearly have a message as part of your campaign, how do you try to expand the progressive coalition, the people that aren't currently there, those more moderate, those more conservative individuals? How do you try and reach out to those voters and make them understand that your policies align with them?
For the most part, they know it. They just don't know that they know it. So, for example, when you look at the people that were in exit polls and saying that Medicare for all was a top priority for the people that were voting, but yet you saw that even in those places, Joe Biden would beat Bernie Sanders. So it's one of those things where I think voter education is a huge part of and that's a huge part of our campaign and what we're doing. But when you really talk to people, whether they consider themselves progressive or moderate or independent or whatever they call themselves, for the most part, they support the same things. They just have different terms for it. And especially when you present it to people properly, when you don't say it, hey, you're going to lose your health insurance. You don't want to lose your health insurance, right? So I think that I have met so many people that are not typically would be in my camp that are very supportive. And for the most part, everyone wants the money out of politics. I haven't met a person, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Libertarian, Green, what have you, that doesn't want the money out and is sick of people on the corporate payroll. And I know an inordinate amount of people, my husband included, who didn't necessarily feel like Bernie's progressive message was that to them, but they just trust him. Mm-hmm. They just trust him. They just like that he's not bought. And I think that speaks volumes. And when you can trust somebody and you think that they have good judgment and they're looking out for you, you don't need to agree on everything. You really don't. And I think that's something that we forget a lot. We have this thing where you have to agree with everything. And if somebody steps out of line on one thing, not only are you not supporting them, but you have to disavow them. Yeah. And I don't buy that. I think that we all, I go to Republican club meetings. They are against drilling in the Everglades. I'm against drilling in the Everglades. They are helping with our citizens election audit, which is obviously very important to me. And I connected the Republicans with the Progressive Caucus. So I think that you reach people by really getting to know them and explaining that we have the same issues, at least some of the same issues.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that you can't expect the full platform. And I do also agree that the biggest rallying point, which we do here in our own movement, is democracy reform. We're not bought. We're here for you. We may not always agree because we're just humans. No humans always agree on everything, but that we are here to represent you to the best of our abilities. The last question I have, and friends in chat, start sending your questions so that Jen can answer them afterwards. But my last question for you is, how do you in general try to assess how a politician or a candidate is doing? How do you know when they're someone that you want as part of your movement or someone who needs to be replaced? I think you have a particularly well-known candidate that you're going against, so it's pretty clear in your case. There's a lot of evidence. But how in general do you assess if someone's right for the district or right for the movement?
It really isn't that difficult. I mean, we could even just look at congressional approval ratings, actually. I mean, you really could. If you look at the congressional approval ratings, but then look at how these people keep getting reelected, you realize, okay, there's something broken there. Something's not right. Now, Bernie has an extremely high approval rating, and there probably are a few others as well. But when somebody is just sitting there because they live in a closed primary gerrymandered district and it's virtually impossible to vote them out, and of course, they are not going to support term limits for themselves, that's where people get stuck. And so basically time marches on around them and they're still stuck in the 90s and they're not understanding. And in the case of my congresswoman, she still refers to marijuana as a gateway drug. She, it's like they have been living in maybe some sort of very, self-isolated echo chamber and not realizing that they are completely out of touch. If they ever were, I don't know. But more than anything, we need to get the oligarchy out. We cannot be accountable for interests and shareholders in things like people's health care. It's not working for us.
Yeah, I do agree with you there. I think the money source is always a big one. You have to walk the walk if you really want to truly believe you're anti-corruption. You can't be taking their money as much as humanly possible. But Jen, thank you for answering all of my questions. I'd like to now transition to my audience's questions. The first one I got here came from an Otto Thorpe. Otto asks, can you specifically reference, on your website, you say that you are interested in some universal basic income ideas, potentially pilots. What is that in your mind look like? Is it a study? And how would that potentially differ in your mind from something like Andrew Yang had championed during his campaign?
I don't know that it would be different from what Andrew Yang was championing during his campaign. What I've always maintained is that UBI is something that I completely support the concept of. Right now, I don't see a particular piece of legislation. I think that we should all be having automatic, like what Canada's doing during the coronavirus crisis. We should be all getting a couple $1,000s a month as a universal basic income, just as an emergency situation. But my thoughts about it, I like the same thing with the climate. I am just very receptive to whatever we can do to provide a better social safety net for people. So Andrew Yang's idea is great. I like the idea of Social Security for all. So my goal is to improve the social safety net for the people that have none. And whatever ways that come across my desk that I can best get that forward, or the soonest get it forward to move us in that direction, is the kind of things I'm going to support. So I don't have one exact idea, but I am just very receptive to that, as long as it's not in lieu of increase in minimum wage and universal health care. So that's the only part of UBI that concerns me, is when it's thought of instead of those things. And I don't like that at all.
So I had a question to follow up on Otto's. You mentioned Social Security for all as a branding. What led you to come to that as how you wanted to frame that type of a conversation?
Actually, that's funny. My campaign manager, he calls it Social Security for all. But to me, it's really just human decency. I think people should be able to have a roof over their head. I think people are entitled to healthcare. I think people are entitled to an education. So the idea of people having their basic needs being met via a universal basic income, while it isn't something I necessarily was really thinking about prior to Andrew Yang's participation in the primaries, and I'm very thankful for that, because I think that's a very good conversation to bring up. And it's just definitely an idea worth pursuing. So I don't have some real long history with it. It's not something I'm an expert on, but I definitely support the idea of helping people and giving them a social safety net. So if that is an idea that would be something people can get behind, then let's do that. Then yay.
Okay. Yeah. And I do like that idea. Like, the second biggest pillar that we support here is, universal basic income and what we call universal basic services, which encompasses that, healthcare, that housing, that transportation, et cetera. So I totally agree with you there. I think that the whole branding question is a little bit tricky. I tend to like universal basic income compared to Social Security for all, because to me, that sounds like, if I'm an old voter, I'm thinking I'm already getting Social Security. Am I getting something new, or are you simply giving it to everyone else?
Oh, no, I understand. But it's the same concept. Everybody is getting a check. Everybody is getting something that helps their needs be met. That's the point of it, Yeah, I don't care what you call it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think the branding does help, especially appealing to those older voters who just need it kind of like spoon-fed sometimes, because they don't want to get into the weeds of the policy. But I think just supporting the idea in general is very beneficial. Let's go to our next question. This comes from Nelson Orta. He asked, would you organize with the Fight for 15 movement to raise the minimum wage to 15? My more generic question to you is, how do you want to set a minimum wage? Do you think $15 is the right goal to hit?
2 points. One, I do work with the Fight for 15 people in our local Miami-Dade and Broward chapters, and I've often gone to their rallies and protests. We have very big protests at McDonald's that often are occurring down here with the Fight for 15, and I support them 100%. So I support that. We say $15 an hour because that is the policy that is currently on the table. That's the agenda that they're pushing. So I'm going to say I fight for that. But no, it's not enough, because if it were moving in the direction it should be with productivity and the top tiers profits, we'd be at like $27 an hour in where I live. So to me, I've been saying from the beginning, I think they should be asking for more. But so I support the Fight for 15 because that's existing, and I'm behind that. But it absolutely has to be tied to standard of living, cost of living, and inflation. And right now it's just $8.25 in Fort Lauderdale.
Hmm. And I'd be curious, one of the main groups that usually is advocating against it is small business owners. They feel like they cannot hit the wage amounts, and they feel like it's a lot easier for a large corporation like Amazon to pay $15 an hour, but it's hard for them as a mom and pop stop with, not as much capital on hand. How do you try to address those concerns on why we still need to be having a $15 an hour minimum wage?
I think that this is one of those concepts that's sort of always been put out there almost in a talking point sort of way as to a reason that we can't give people a living wage. And I just fundamentally don't agree that that's the impact that it would have. However, that being said, I think there are people that are experts in this field and can absolutely come up with policy that is kind to small businesses and gives people a living wage, whether it's subsidies, whether it's different types of incentives that you give to small businesses that supplements that for them, or whatever it is. It is just not an excuse to not have people having a living wage. And even if at a minimum you wanted to have it dependent on business sizes, then that's, you need to, just, this needs to be examined. But there is no reason that people are not being paid a living wage. So it has to happen. And then we need to have people that are able to make that as amenable as possible for small businesses. So I understand that. I'm not without understanding that, but I haven't really seen any real evidence that that's the case as to what happens. So my understanding is that that's not true, but regardless, people need a living wage. So if you can't run your business while giving people a living wage, then you're not running a very viable business.
Okay, let's go to our next question. This is a question that's a little bit more tactical. Let's say you are able to win your race. Who would you want to become the new Speaker of the House?
I am not even, this is so not, that is just talk about a very politically incorrect thing for me to step in. I am not familiar enough with all 435 people that are in there to make that assessment. I'm really not. I know a lot of our South Florida contingency. I know a few other people, whatever, but that's a lot of people. So I wouldn't want to rule out anybody who I would think is highly qualified, but I definitely support Shahid Buttar challenging our speaker in California. So I could tell you who I'd rather not be the Speaker of the House, but yeah, I don't know enough about the rest of I don't know enough to say.
Yeah, and I think that's the appropriate answer, because to this Ranger Mike, there's a lot of races. We don't know who's going to populate the House. So who knows? There could be a lot of fresh faces, hopefully. Let's go to our next question. This comes from Victoria. How would you try to fight military spending? From the House, you don't have as much discretion as like the president. What would you try and do?
I would start by not signing off on his ridiculous military budget in the first place. And so my first step would be, as we were talking about, when you have a block of actual real progressives that are willing to not be popular and willing to not be liked and just can take a stand, and you're not going to win for a while, right? Like we could see the numbers. We're not crazy about it, right? But, you have to start by standing up against it. So you don't call somebody, call the president a lunatic, crazy person on one hand, and then say, oh, but let's give him more military money on the other. So the first step is to stop supporting the increases. But that needs, to me, I support it being cut in at least half. I find it absurd. I find it that as a taxpayer, that the majority of my money is going to kill poor people in places that I've never seen or been or have never hurt me in any way is absurd. And we all know it, and we all agree with it. We know what it's doing to our environment. And the only thing is that those contractors and those businesses have bought off our Congress. And we know this. This isn't a secret. We know that everything we see sponsored by Boeing and Raytheon, and this is not news. So we need to stop being on the payroll of those businesses and stop doing their bidding. And if you didn't have a Congress that was being supported by those companies, they wouldn't keep giving them the money and the subsidies to keep doing what they're doing. So I'd say it's the same as everything else. I'd start by not agreeing with the insane military budget we already have.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, we had another person ask kind of a similar follow-up question. Today is Memorial Day. What would you do in Congress to convince other members to, finally sunset the 2001 authorization of use of military force? Because frankly, that use of military force agreement is why we have such a high budget, because we constantly feel like we're in a state of war.
Nelson, if I had a perfect strategy for that, I swear I would like implement day one. But I can tell you that that is something that I will never, ever stop harping on, ever. That and the Patriot Act are up there for me as things that I will never stop harping on. I will never agree. It's never going to be okay. And there's never going to be a day where I'm not thinking that that needs to be undone. So it's one of those things that I just feel like I just got to stand firm on that and put it out there and just really do the best I can to get my constituents to understand the importance of it and really support other people like me to get in there, to get more of us. But yeah, that has to go away. I mean, that just has to go away.
I mean, yeah, if we had the silver bullet solution here, we'd be screaming it from the rooftops before we even get into power, just saying, this is what you do, Progressive Caucus, start doing this. But it takes many of us. And so that's the first step, is getting more of us elected. Let's go to one more question here before you get these people understanding how they can help your campaign out if they so wish. Wrong one, click there, wrong. Here, this is from Hardy Hat. They said, let's say you win. What are the first 3 issues you try to address in Congress, and what's your game plan? You know, beforehand, you elaborate on what you think the 3 most important issues are. But what do you think are those first things that you think you can really, accomplish? Like put a bill, actually get co-sponsors for, and move it forward?
I've been asked this before, and it's a great question. And I really just wish people would understand that there's like 800 and something pieces of legislation that are sitting there. Some of them are actually really decent pieces of legislation that are going nowhere because they're not getting the support. So I always think that the first thing to do is to go in there and look at for every piece of legislation and put your signature on it that is something that's moving things in the right direction. Maybe that'll be the final one it needs for something. One of these days, the Pramila Jayapal's Medicare for All bill will have enough signatures on it. So I would look at what legislation is there that's pending that I think is closest to getting done and go with that. But really anything that is about narrowing the wealth and income inequality and providing a social safety net. So I am someone that is also very practical. So if I were to get in Congress and there is something that's just sitting there that's only a few people shy that you could get this, I'm likely to hop on that and push that. And as opposed to reinvent the wheel, it just seems that's probably the better way to go. However, I am very, very open and receptive to people that have progressive policy ideas and would love to work with different people, different places that I consider to have amazing concepts as to where we should go with policy. But I don't have anything in particular right now. I just can tell you all the things that are sitting there that need to be put through that are there. So.
Yeah. And, I do think that's the appropriate first step. It shows that it's not about you and your bill. It's about, let's get all these other things that are already out there. Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good solutions already on the table. So I do agree with that approach, because frankly, it's not a problem of, we don't have the ideas out there. It's just, they're not being moved forward, frankly.
Exactly.
So I totally agree with you there. So, Jen, we've answered a lot of questions today about what your campaign stands for. If people here are enjoying what you're saying and want to help vote out Debbie Wasserman Schultz, how can they support your campaign, both if they are in your district as well as likely the majority of them that are, online and want to support you potentially?
Well, I see you've got my website scrolling. So gen2020.com is where you go. Obviously, we need donations. We love $23 for District 23. We're, entering into our 4th quarter. So if you could be a monthly donor, that would be great. We're mostly small monthly donations. We also need phone bankers, and that can be done from the comfort of your own home, anywhere you are, and you can sign up at gen2020.com. We need people to follow us, retweet us on Twitter. We're Gen FL-23. And really just spread the word. If you live in district and you have any ability to host a yard sign, we need that too. So, again, gen2020.com, sign up, volunteer. If you have any questions, you could send me an email, which is jen@gen2020.com. So.
Well, thank you, Jen, for being here today. I do hope everyone supports Jen in her campaign. I know not just all the lovely answers she's given us today, but the incumbent is really someone we do need to replace. Debbie Wasserman Schultz has enabled not just her own bills that she's put forward, but the people that have been running for the presidency, as you all may be aware from 2016. This is an important race, and I do hope that people go to gen2020.com to be able to get plugged in and support your campaign. So, Jen, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Now, Rosebuds, just to wrap up, just wanted to let you know that we're not done here. We're going to be interviewing more congressional candidates to come this week. So I want you all to be aware that we're going to be interviewing on Thursday, Sandra Choi. On Friday, we're also going to be interviewing Lauren Ashcraft. So come again on 6:30 p.m. and you'll be able to see all of them. I know. I'm looking forward to both of those conversations.
I only know Lauren. I know Lauren's my slate mate. I don't know the other lady, but Lauren. I love Lauren.
Well, yeah, I will give a shout out from you to Lauren that you gave some love to her on your own time. And the last thing is, if you want to see beyond interviews, this Wednesday, we're going to be hosting a universal basic income debate between two of, honestly, the most prominent universal basic income advocates we have, in Alex Howlett as well as Carl Wildquist. So we look forward to that. Alex is, they're both universal basic income advocates, but, when you're very well versed on it, you could take the against position pretty well, too, because you know the nitpicking argument. So we're looking forward to that as well. But again, thank you all for tuning in and being able to hear out Jen today and hopefully going and supporting her campaign at gen2020.com. And Jen, thank you so much for being here again. I hope everyone's staying safe out there in these crazy times because, frankly, I have been seeing absolute disregard for safety standards in my own community. No one's wearing masks. So I hope you all are staying sane indoors, hopefully. And I hope you all are staying happy and rosy out there.